Melbourne, Australia. In this city's busy and modern hospitals, patients are waging a life and death struggle against a virulent infection outbreak. Undetected by human eyes and carried by patients, nurses, and doctors, it spreads like wildfire. But only 40 years ago, scientists believed that they had conquered infection. The development of penicillin had ushered in a golden age of antibiotics, effective against a variety of deadly diseases. What went wrong? How could infection have again seized the upper hand? How could a hospital control a runaway infection outbreak when its best weapon, the wonder drugs, are being rendered useless? Tonight, Nova explores when wonder drugs don't work.
Major funding for Nova is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
Down to 14 degrees. Tomorrow shouldn't be too bad though. Fine, mild and becoming sunny and a top of 21. And for Saturday looking good. Fine, warm at last and sunny. You got any plans for it?
The men driving this ambulance do not normally dress this way, but a virulent organism is sweeping through eastern Australia's large hospitals, and it seems nothing can block its progress.
The Health Minister, Mr. Roper, and his senior officers are examining reports that the golden staph infection has reached epidemic proportions in major Victorian hospitals. The germ, which is reported to have affected thousands of patients, has developed resistance to all but one antibiotic.
The Australians call this germ MRSA, which stands for multiply resistant Staphylococcus aureus. They've been fighting it since 1977. Draconian measures had to be taken to get the outbreak under control. In Melbourne by 1980, 36 hospitals were affected. The focal point for much of the concern was the city's most prestigious teaching hospital, the Royal Melbourne. Any patient admitted during the height of the epidemic stood a 1 in 6 chance of picking up the infection during his stay. People coming in for routine surgery could be delayed for months. Nursing homes and smaller hospitals refused to accept their patients. The organism responsible for the outbreak is called Staphylococcus aureus. In the last 40 years, it has undergone a dramatic change. When Alexander Fleming first spread it on his culture dish, he made the classic observation that it was killed by the penicillin mold. But today, that same Staphylococcus can resist the effects of not just penicillin, but other antibiotics as well. Staphylococcus aureus, a bacterium sometimes known as the golden staph, normally lives harmlessly on our skin or in our nasal passages. But if it entered into the wrong place, into the blood or bone, it can cause serious and sometimes fatal infections in people whose defense mechanisms have been weakened. Back in the 40s, scientists thought they had the answer to infectious disease. A new source of wonder drugs had been unearthed.
Secrets hidden in the soil for countless ages have been revealed in one of the greatest scientific detective hunts of all time.
Scientists had discovered that naturally occurring germ-killing chemicals could be harvested from organisms that lived in the soil.
What new discoveries still lie locked in the soil? What possible cures for diseases as yet untouched? From the tedious developmental years of penicillin has emerged a specialized industry accomplishing feats impossible a decade ago. Pressing steadily forward, scientists and physicians of vision and experience may soon make the next great contribution to the age of antibiotics.
The discoveries of new and stronger antibiotics continued. A handful of drug companies recognized their healing and profit potential. For the researchers, the pressure was on to produce more antibiotics. But by the 50s, the heady optimism was evaporating. The organisms which antibiotics were designed to destroy were fighting back. Many hospitals around the world were plagued with a new strain of Staphylococcus, resistant to every available antibiotic. It attacked not only frail patients, but staff members as well. The panic was disguised by the sober language of this training film.
Beware of any staff, male or female, with a boil or septic spot. They may be a cross-infection menace. It must always be remembered that sufferers from boils are almost certainly nasal carriers of pathogenic staphylococci, so the nose should be treated as well.
They hopefully massaged noses with antiseptics, but the problem was not controlled until a new group of semi-synthetic antibiotics called the methicillins were developed. Throughout the 60s, it looked as though the chemists had the upper hand again. But the more these antibiotics were used, the more likely it became that resistant strains would emerge. At the end of the 70s, reports started coming in of new strains of Staphylococcus, resistant to methicillin and up to 8 other antibiotics as well. The worst reports came from Australia. Dr. Stuart Levy is professor of medicine and microbiology at Tufts University School of Medicine in Boston. He is chairing an international task force to examine the problem of antibiotic resistance.
A very dramatic and important example of how a resistant bacteria can change the ways of a complete hospital and even a city occurred in Melbourne, Australia. In the late 70s, a single hospital began to have a problem with this multiple resistance in a staphylococcus, and they couldn't treat it. And soon other hospitals in Melbourne developed the same problem.
The outbreak began in 1977 when the first cases appeared on the burns and surgical wards.
It's closing up really well. Getting much, much better. Yeah. Give it about 3 or 4 more days, and we get a skin graft on top of that.
Surgery patients with deep wounds were particularly vulnerable. When the wounds became infected, skin grafts and worse still, bone grafts were destroyed. It is thought that a patient with an infected foot may have spread more than just a few friendly words around the ward. Once released in the environment, the bacteria from his foot spread insidiously, lingering everywhere and exposing patients to the risk of infection. From the bedclothes, the tiny germ-laden skin flakes of a carrier could be wafted into the air to land on a neighbor's bed. It was further spread by nurses and doctors as they passed from bed to bed, carrying it from the skin of one patient onto the skin of another. Noses became potential reservoirs. Every sneeze and sniffle could release a cloud of the resistant germ. The organism's ability to colonize people and places so readily was particularly dangerous in areas like intensive care. Here, critically ill people whose natural defenses are down are often put on intravenous fluids and tubes, providing a direct route for the organism to enter their bloodstream and cause infection. Outside, the public and the press knew little. But by the middle of 1981, the hospital's infection control team had pieced together an alarming picture of how this multiply resistant organism spread through the hospital. After the first cases appeared in burns and surgical wards, it spread to the intensive care unit. Patients from here carried it to the rest of the hospital as they were transferred to other wards. Gradually, the infection spread from bed to bed, from ward to ward, from floor to floor. Surgical, medical, renal, and cardiothoracic wards were all affected. But the doctors who only saw their own patients were unaware of the wider picture. The full scale of the problem was only apparent to the microbiology team, headed by Dr. Ken Harvey.
The problem seemed to us to be immense. No one seemed to be particularly interested. The clinicians felt that the organism wasn't causing any harm to patients, whereas we at the centre, seeing all the cases of infection, had a different view. And we were just incredibly frustrated as an infection control team at that point in time. Nothing seemed to be happening. My brief today is to inform you about the nature of this superbug, the problems that it's caused, our attempts at control, and the current state of the battle.
Ken Harvey felt that the best way of getting the message across to the skeptical physicians was to give an impassioned lecture.
Before 1977, the organism was only isolated occasionally from Melbourne. But by 1979, 36 hospitals reported problems in this city. In the 12 months from 1980 to 81, MRSA was isolated from 545 patients in this hospital. It was judged to have caused a significant clinical infection in 50%. Of those 254 patients, 30% died.
It wasn't just the large number of new cases that concerned Ken Harvey, it was also the disturbing pattern of antibiotic resistance that was emerging. Recently, resistance had developed to 2 more antibiotics, gentamicin and chloramphenicol. This meant that Staphylococcus was sensitive to only one, vancomycin. Vancomycin has always been a last resort antibiotic since its first use in the 50s. It has to be closely monitored because of its serious side effects, which can include deafness and kidney damage. It also costs as much as $800 a day per patient. So far, resistance to vancomycin hasn't emerged. Its rare use in the past may be one reason why it still works today.
The increasing infection rate caused by MRSA has necessitated an escalating use of vancomycin, raising the real possibility that vancomycin resistance may also emerge, leaving us with nothing with which to treat hospital-acquired staphylococcal infection. Despite continued searching, there have been no new discoveries of an anti-staphylococcal agent since 1964, merely chemical modifications of drugs we already have. The pessimists would say that we may have found all the antibiotics there are to find, but in 40 years hence, we may look back on the antibiotic era as just a passing phase in the long history of medicine, an era in which a great natural resource was squandered, the bugs proved smarter than the biochemists, with the consequence that doctors once again could only deal with sepsis by draining pus and excising devitalised tissue. Faced with this scenario, it does seem prudent to attempt the control of antibiotic-resistant organisms.
That task fell to the infection control sister, the nurse who occupied the delicate middle ground between the medical staff and the microbiologists. Armed only with lab reports, Val Humphrey's mandate was to banish this bacterium from the wards.
I'll start with the people in the isolation.
It was almost impossible to try and pinpoint where it had started and how it was getting around the hospital.
Fighting this germ wasn't going to be easy. It can survive for months in dry, dusty places which are difficult to clean.
We did embark on a search and destroy effort to locate areas where MRSA might be a problem.
How long's that equipment been up there?
And we found it in many, many places, and particularly on things like the beds and the bedside lockers and the chairs that patients sat up in during the day.
I'll complain about that.
This is one of the rooms she surveyed. She found MRSA on the blind, on the windowsill, on the lamp, on the chair, and all over the floor. And this was after the room had been cleaned. The germ wasn't confined to the wards. The hospital laundry had to handle an influx of infected linen. To their horror, they discovered that the infected linen had somehow contaminated the clean linen store. This was potentially disastrous because the laundry supplied not only the Royal Melbourne, but 75 other hospitals in the area. It began to look as though the laundry could be a major reservoir of Staphylococcus. With an emergency fund of around $2 million, laundry manager Noel Brown set out to stop the spread.
This is the area which we hold our clean linen prior to dispatch, and this is the area that we concentrated most heavily in. We pulled our shelving apart, we pulled the bottom shelves off, cleaned underneath, we replaced the flooring, we disinfected all the walls, we repainted them. The windows you see up there, we welded them closed so none of the people who work here could possibly open them. And it's been something like 4 years now since we've found any MRSA in this area.
Meanwhile, back on the wards, Val Humphrey was trying to identify which of the staff members were carrying it.
The other thing we'd like to do is to do your nose swab. If you want to do it yourself, that's okay.
I'll trust you.
No? Do you want to do it?
It took a lot of charm and diplomacy to carry out this policing operation.
It was very difficult to approach staff and say, can we take cultures of your hands as part of an epidemiological investigation.
But Val Humphrey got her way and invariably found that staff members were carrying the organism on their hands. Surprisingly, she found that the oldest and simplest aseptic precaution, washing hands, was being neglected. The doctors, she found, were the worst offenders.
Medical staff don't wash their hands before and after touching patients. One particular surgeon once said to me, Val, you tell me how to wash my hands and I'll do it. And I said, if you have to be told how to wash your hands, then you shouldn't be here as far as I'm concerned. The concept, I think, with most medical staff is that they only wash their hands when the patient's dirty. And that is that they can see something like faeces or pus and they've touched it. So they're really thinking of themselves, and I don't want that on my hands, but not thinking of the concept of what I've got on my hands I'm taking to the next patient.
But one central issue caused Val Humphrey's relationship with the medical staff to deteriorate.
Hi, Greg.
Hi.
Have you heard of golden staph?
No, I haven't.
It's a type of an organism that spreads infection. And I'm just going to do a routine screen just to test to see if you have it.
The question was whether a patient who carried the organism but was not infected by it represented a risk to others in the ward.
Okay, thanks.
Val Humphrey believed in checking as many patients as possible. When she found carriers, she had them removed from the ward to a separate isolation unit, and this is when the trouble started.
I had a lot of problems from clinicians. There was a lot of antagonism, there was a lot of yelling. And there were a lot of them and one of me, and I was copying the brunt of it.
What concerned the doctors most was that a patient making a steady recovery might be removed from their ward, and some of them doubted whether the reasons for doing so were valid.
Does it feel better since the operation? There's a difference between the presence of an organism or a germ, perhaps on someone's skin or in the air, and anybody getting harm from it. It's not necessary to go around on a tiger hunt searching for little germs in every armpit and on everybody's skin or up their nostrils. I think that's what worried clinicians most, that there was an overboard reaction, that here were germs, something drastic had to be done, such as isolating a patient away from the general run of their care, and that this might be harmful to them.
Isolation is designed to protect the rest of the hospital from germs, but to doctors, the elaborate precautions detract from patient care. Val Humphrey remembers a particular incident when she isolated a patient with staphylococcal pneumonia.
It is generally accepted around the world that anybody with staph pneumonia is isolated. It's not something I cooked up. And when the consultant went up to the ward and found this, he was really angry and he ripped the isolation precautions sign off the patient's door. He refused to wear a gown to see the patient. And he implied that the patient would be receiving second-rate care because they were being isolated.
Well, the isolation unit has two sorts of people in it. The ones who are quite healthy and don't need to be there, and it's not really a problem for them, it's an expense and a nuisance for everyone. The frail patients who go there, who are actually suffering from an infection, they do get less attention. Of necessity, people can visit them less easily and look after them less effectively, and they are the ones who suffer, and there have been patients who've died as a result of being there, who may not have died if they were in an ordinary ward situation.
The nurses bitterly contest that the quality of care is any different in the isolation unit. On the contrary, they maintain that it is superior, since the staff-to-patient ratio is higher than on a normal ward. Such issues created so much tension in the hospital, Dr. Harvey felt he should defuse it in some way.
What I now propose to do is to explore the psyche of the actors in this drama, for it is there that I believe our problems lie. First, I would like to introduce to you the infection control team, and first of all, professors of microbiology. These are often august gentlemen, heavy with wisdom, capable of ex cathedra pronouncements on any topic. But unfortunately, the modern variety seems more concerned about recombinant DNA than it is about exploring the mundane and messy problems of battling hospital-acquired infection. Next, we have hospital microbiologists, often keen and enthusiastic chaps, but somewhat innocent of the power politics of large institutions, symbolised by the fig leaf worn on their head. Then we have infection control sisters, chosen not so much for their good looks, but for their ability to stick their noses into other people's business, nevertheless representing the sole frontline troops of the infection control team and often the only members of a team capable of any coherent action at all. In the other corner, so to speak, are our clinical colleagues. First, the surgeons. Now, this particular species never has a problem with hospital-acquired infection. And just to make sure, he issues instructions to his staff banning swabs being taken on any of his patients who produce pus. Next comes our astute and knowledgeable physicians. This chap has just been asked if he'd like to give up some of his beds to form an isolation unit. And finally, we have medical administrators. Now, with a cast like this, is it any wonder that the control of antibiotic-resistant organisms has been slow and painful?
Then a far more critical problem emerged. At that time, the Royal Melbourne had no heart surgery unit of its own, so all operations were done at the neighbouring St. Vincent's. A 1980 unpublished survey showed a scandalously high infection rate. Immediately after the operation, the patients did well, but after they transferred back to the Royal Melbourne, problems emerged days, weeks, or even months later. A third of heart surgery patients were picking up a highly resistant Staphylococcus, and the infection rate was at least 10 times above the acceptable level.
Mr. Carr, things are going a lot better, certainly better than last week.
Mr. Carr was one of their patients who fought a 3-year battle against this resistant germ after a series of heart operations.
Okay, I'm looking forward to talking to you again about the cricket. Okay.
His wife has watched the debilitating effect it had on him.
I'd never heard of it until 3 years ago, until after the heart operation. And when he was transferred from St. Vincent's back here to the Royal Melbourne, that they discovered it. And evidently it's been in his system all this time because it's flared up again after this third open heart surgery. I think it is just rotten luck. But I think if Frank could tell you right now, he can't speak to you because he's got the trachea in the throat, as you know. But I would say he's totally fed up with the whole thing. Totally fed up. But he's going to get better.
Unfortunately, Mr. Carr died 2 weeks later. The infection control team at St. Vincent's was deeply concerned. They quickly went to work to try to find where the MRSA was coming from. They tested the air, put plates all around the operating room, and swabbed all the equipment. The lab results were inconclusive. They could not trace the source of the infection to any particular place. Next, they turned their attention to the people working in the operating room. Could the deep-seated germ in the sweat glands of their hands be passing through their gloves? They checked each pair of gloves for holes. Some indeed were punctured, and now surgeons are encouraged to wear 2 pairs as an extra precaution. But it was hardly likely to be the major reason for the high infection rate. Many other measures were introduced. After more vigorous cleaning, the room was left empty between operations for long enough to allow clean air to dilute out any remaining bacteria. But the most important change in practice is that patients no longer spend several days in the hospital before the operation. Now they are admitted the night before, so that they can get into surgery as quickly as possible, before they have a chance to pick up any resistant organisms that might be lingering on the wards. The cumulative effect of all these measures seems to have been successful. Although the alarming attack rate of the early 80s could never be satisfactorily explained, St. Vincent's can now boast a virtually infection-free record.
Number 20.
Yet a far more fundamental and long-term problem remains. Hospitals around the world have to cope with the increasing problem of resistant infections.
Hospitals are fascinating environments. We herd together lots of susceptible patients or patients susceptible to infection. We pour into that closed environment kilograms of a variety of antibiotics. Something like 30 to 40% of all patients in this institution receive antibiotics at any one time. They excrete them in their urine and their feces. They excrete them in their sweat. The entire environment is permeated with antibiotics. If we pick up dust from a floor, we can measure finite concentrations of antibiotics. Staff and patients coming into this environment breathe it in, and it acts as a selective pressure on their own organisms.
The more an antibiotic is used, the more likely it is that resistance will emerge. The antibiotic allows the resistant organism to survive. But where does resistance come from in the first place?
Resistance, of course, was not something that we invented. It existed in nature for millennia. Antibiotics are drugs that are made normally by bacteria that generally are living in the soil. And they need to protect themselves against their own products, so they have mechanisms of resistance. And through evolution, bacteria living in the same environment as they have developed resistance. We believe that this is the initial origin of these resistance genes, these resistance determinants that now are being picked up in bacteria that actually cause infections in man or live in association with man.
Bacteria have several mechanisms of resistance. Most commonly, resistance genes are carried on plasmids, small ring-like chains of DNA, shorter in length than chromosomes. A bacterial cell can have many of these plasmids. Initially, it may be a single cell that carries these genes. But when an antibiotic to which these genes are resistant is introduced into this environment, all the other cells are killed except the cell with the resistant genes. This cell will then multiply and flourish without competition in the presence of the antibiotic. Perversely, the continuing use of that antibiotic actually encourages the growth of the cells with resistant genes.
It's like inadvertently killing off all the healthy grass on a lawn, and you have one resistant piece of crabgrass. You've left the lawn wide open for all those other crabgrass seeds to come in and take over the lawn. This is what can happen. It's kind of Darwinian selection, but not natural, because we are actually introducing the strong selective force, the antibiotic. We've made them in enormous quantities, and now we can use them in large quantities. These antibiotics kill off any bacteria which is susceptible. That makes sense. But what survives? The surviving bacteria are those that by chance picked up a resistance gene. And now they find an environment completely clean of normal competitors. And since nutrients for growth are limited in the environment, they now have an open area with plenty of nutrients to grow, and they're obviously surviving the antibiotic. And while the antibiotic is there, they have a selective advantage.
But this is just the beginning. Genes carrying this resistance trait can move around freely within cells. Other mobile genetic elements called transposons or jumping genes can travel from a temporary place on the plasmid to a more permanent position on the chromosomes, or vice versa. These jumping genes can also transpose themselves from one cell to another. They can even move between cells of different species of bacteria. In this way, many organisms can acquire new multi-resistant patterns without the evolutionary process of chromosomal inheritance. A single plasmid can accumulate a whole battery of genes, each resistant to a different antibiotic. Up to 8 have been found on one plasmid. This has sinister implications. This organism has now acquired multiple resistance. So if one of these 8 antibiotics is introduced, it kills off the non-resistant cells as before, but now all the surviving cells are resistant to 8 antibiotics, even though they have only been exposed to 1. This is the way more and more antibiotics are rendered impotent. Today, antibiotics are abundant worldwide. The U.S. alone produces 35 million pounds each year. With so much in the environment, what does the future hold?
Lots of people question whether or not we're going to return to the pre-antibiotic era. Are we actually going to be through with these kinds of drugs? And I don't think so. I think that we're approaching a time where the cost of treating infections is increasing, and the ability for us to treat in an effective way large numbers of people are being curtailed extremely by the resistant bacterium. In the developed world, if cost isn't the issue, new antibiotics are coming available.
But antibiotic resistance is not confined to the developed world. In fact, the most worrisome reports of antibiotic resistance come from the developing nations. In many of these countries, anyone can buy antibiotics over the counter. The chance for overuse is far greater, and resistant organisms flourish. International travel can spread them even further.
This has been demonstrated in the problem of gonorrhea, which started in Southeast Asia, then became a problem in Europe and the United States. Typhoid fever, resistant in Mexico, became a problem in the United States. Diarrhea syndromes, which were part of a problem in one country in Central America, soon spread to all of Central America and even into the United States. So an organism really knows no national boundaries. It doesn't need a passport to go from one country to the other. And in fact, it travels very easily. This kind of intercontinental, transcontinental spread is now becoming more obvious as we're learning more about resistance genes and being able to track them.
Dr. Levy is president of a pressure group called the Alliance for the Prudent Use of Antibiotics.
I think we want to keep it concise. Bonnie, how much room do you think we'll have for the Bangladesh article if we leave it like Czechoslovakia?
There's very little room left at the bottom of that.
Fine.
Through a regularly published newsletter, this organization promotes the appropriate use of antibiotics and tries to influence the prescribing habits of doctors worldwide.
Yeah.
Dr. Ken Harvey is also a member of the Alliance. Back in Melbourne, he is running his own vigorous campaign.
The simple solution to antibiotic-resistant organisms is to withdraw the selection pressures. The problem with withdrawing all antibiotics is that patients are going to die from infection, so we can't do that. All we can hope to do is maintain a balance, is to use the least amount of antibiotics consistent with curing patients and preventing infections in the most discriminating way we can. Certainly not to use them prolifically like we are at the moment, and indiscriminately and inappropriately.
Dr. Harvey did a survey which revealed that half of the antibiotics prescribed in his hospital were not being prescribed properly. He also discovered that doctors were resorting far too regularly to the so-called broad-spectrum class of drugs, drugs which attack a range of different bacteria.
Clinicians like broad-spectrum drugs, the refuge of the diagnostically destitute, we call it, because in theory it doesn't matter what you treat. If you've got a broad agent, it will kill all germs. In practice, life's never as simple as that. And in practice, one can be much more discriminating in your selection of antibiotics as a rule. The danger of using broad-spectrum antibiotics to treat any infection is that you're selecting out resistance on a broad front. If they're active against 20 microorganisms, then all those 20 are being put under selection pressures to become resistant.
In cooperation with other hospitals all over Australia, Ken Harvey drew up a list of restricted antibiotics. To prescribe these, doctors must get permission from microbiologists.
Yes, although the patient does have the approved infection, we still have to have a microbiologist opinion, and we will need to have the name of the microbiologist that you consulted. Yes, that's right.
But it would be totally impractical to have microbiologists check every prescription for every antibiotic. And Dr. Harvey had sympathy for the doctors who could not be expected to master a very complex field, which is often complicated by drug company propaganda. Yet Ken Harvey felt he must try to educate the doctors in some way.
The first thing we did was to produce a simple booklet giving guidance on appropriate antibiotic use, thinking that that would solve the problem. But it didn't. Patterns of misprescribing continued, although there were some improvements. So faced with the fact that giving scientific information didn't really seem to change things, we felt we should try another tack. And based on the experiences of the pharmaceutical industry and the success they had with their promotional material, we thought we should consult the professional manipulators.
With a $10,000 grant in his pocket, Dr. Harvey went to one of the largest advertising agencies in the city, who normally wouldn't touch a commission worth less than $500,000. But Jeff Godkin, the company's general manager, took up Harvey's crusade.
Headlong confrontation, we should be. But we will push you as far as we can. Simply because we need a simple, single message that's powerful. And often it's those sorts of messages that offend.
The advertising agency proved a fascinating experience. According to them, it was just a simple marketing problem. People weren't doing the right things. That's fine. You've got experimental animals. You provide an appropriate series of stimuli to those animals, and they will change their behaviour. They saw no problem at all.
We knew we were dealing with a very sensitive category of people, the medical profession, and as we worked further into the campaign, it proved to be correct. Nevertheless, we took the decision to be powerful and intrusive and single-minded, and to use pretty much the same techniques as drug companies do, almost slick commercialism. That's what we're good at. And so we chose one drug that we had a good story behind it, but it focused the attention of what we were trying to do.
They homed in on this expensive broad-spectrum drug, too often used against pneumonia. In its place, they wanted doctors to use the cheaper, more specific penicillin. Every doctor in the hospital was sent a courtesy pad and free pen plastered with catchy messages, urging them to prescribe more wisely. Dispensers containing free copies of Ken Harvey's guidelines were placed around the hospital, and posters were put up everywhere, from nursing stations to the men's lavatory. The question was whether these slick advertising techniques would change the doctor's habits.
The results were quite remarkable. Before the campaign, the particular form of treatment we were trying to influence was only occurring in about 44% of occasions. After the campaign, that went up to 92% of all treatments, so we're in accord with our guidelines booklet. And it was sustained, indeed. We repeated our particular audits 3 months after the campaign had finished, and there was very little slippage. We've repeated them 12 months later, and again the results seem to be sustained.
In the long term, Ken Harvey's attack on antibiotic prescribing habits will not only save money, but should also help slow down the emergence of new antibiotic-resistant organisms. In the meantime, the Royal Melbourne's strict infection control dramatically cut the number of infections by 1984. But 1985 was on its way to a bad start. Christmas and New Year brought with them the usual toll of car accidents and multiple traumas. Casualty was busier than ever. Intensive care was short-staffed and overstretched. A familiar problem was about to emerge.
Bad news from this unit. We are getting too many positives. We've got the Burns fellow, who has now got heavy colonisation.
A quick check on the number of new MRSA cases in intensive care produces an alarming statistic.
Very bad way. And while we're in the same unit, this is a new potential positive, which we found today. It's not fully tested yet.
I think you've got a real problem. That's 14 this month, isn't it?
Yes, I've marked them.
The hard work and strict procedures of previous years have taught Val Humphrey that fast action is the key to preventing an outbreak from becoming an epidemic.
They all seem to be colonised, followed by a respiratory infection, so it may be something related to technique and the respiratory care.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be getting 14 in a month. No. I think we better go down and talk to them.
And so the impromptu investigation begins immediately. What has gone wrong in intensive care? Are the staff members so busy that the extra precaution normally taken there is being ignored?
Looking forward to this. We've got enough on their plates without us.
Floor 2. Going down.
All their powers of diplomacy will be needed on this visit.
For one reason or another, we didn't isolate immediately. Some due to lack of physical isolation facilities.
Do you think it's worth looking at other things down here? I mean, do you think it's worth doing hand washing? Yeah.
This is a subtle way of asking if the strict infection control procedures are being neglected.
I think that things have just probably been so busy. I mean, we'd like to come down here sometime in the next couple of days and do some cultures.
Val Humphrey noticed temporary help attending to patients. Normally, each patient in intensive care has one nurse. Nurses assigned to a patient are not allowed to attend to other patients except in emergency. But this is the holiday season, and nursing staff was in short supply.
But not on a witch hunt, but just to take a look at people's hands to show that, they pick up transient organisms on their hands and can be carting it around from patient to patient, particularly when they're busy.
Just to raise people's awareness that they can transmit stuff from one patient to another.
Well, I don't think people here would think it's a witch hunt. I think they'd be cooperative. Sharon, can we just take a look at your staph patients here?
After checking the isolation room, Val Humphrey finds something disturbing in one of the patient's lab reports.
Oh, here's the problem one. Susan Nichols. Is she still here?
No, she went to a ward yesterday. I'll just see which one.
Where she went? Oh, dear.
It turns out that Mrs. Nichols was transferred to the renal unit before they knew she was MRSA positive.
That could be a problem.
The kidney transplant patients are particularly vulnerable to staphylococcal infection. 5 years ago, 7 people in the renal unit were infected and 1 died. Ever since, they've tried to keep this deadly germ out of here.
I've just been down to intensive care because we had this positive result on the patient down there, and I believe she's up here.
Yes, she is indeed.
Yeah, she's got MRSA in her sputum.
Oh, right.
And she's possibly coming up tomorrow. We haven't got the results for sure yet. And she's probably also got other body sites colonised.
Oh, they've taken more swabs downstairs, have they?
Yeah, they took them. Is she in a room by herself?
Yes, she is in a single room.
What do you think we can do with her? I believe she's had hemodialysis as well.
This morning, yes.
It's usually a policy not to have patients with MRSA on your ward.
Yes, it is.
I think we better have a talk to the medical staff about it.
Yes, certainly. Our doctor is actually here at the moment, if you'd like me to get him for you.
Yeah, please.
Hold on.
Mrs. Nichols' kidneys are failing. She needs dialysis and specialized nursing care. The dilemma is that her needs are in direct conflict with those of other patients. Should she be transferred to the isolation unit downstairs, or should she be allowed to remain here where her worsening condition can be monitored?
All right.
Yes.
Got some bad news for him. Mrs. Nichols has got MRSA in sputum.
Right.
Probably her other body sites are colonised too.
Well, that means problems for the renal unit, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
Yes. Well, we'll have to talk over with Gavin Becker. She can't stay in 7 South East with our transplant patients if she's got MRSA in sputum. All right.
Are you going to try and move her tonight or not?
No, probably not. That's the answer. The problem is with the dialysis sisters as well.
They agree that she should be moved to isolation as soon as possible.
Got MRSA, please.
I'll speak to Gavin.
Righto.
The next morning, however, a new problem is emerging. Mrs. Nichols has an open line to her bloodstream for emergency dialysis.
She's requesting to make an exception just to leave it there.
Patients with such lines are normally not taken to the isolation unit. The staphylococcus that abound there might get into their bloodstream via this route and cause septicemia. The only other option would be to transfer Mrs. Nichols to the Infectious Diseases Hospital, but she is too weak to be moved so far away. So an exception is made. Dialysis will be arranged for her in isolation.
Okay, righto. Yes, I'm quite happy with that. Okay, thanks a lot. Right, bye.
Do you understand about the infection?
Val Humphrey must reassure Mr. Nichols.
It's a highly infectious type of disease that's readily transmitted to everybody. It's probably nasal and throat.
Yeah. She's been very sick and she's picked it up. It's a staph infection, which you've probably heard about. Now, it's not something that you're likely to pick up at all, so there's no concern with you or your family. It's really only with people who are extremely unwell, as your wife has been, pick it up. It is treatable, and we're giving her the antibiotics for it at the moment, but because this is a renal ward and we've got the transplant patients here and the dialysis, we're very reluctant to have patients with this in this ward, and we prefer to have them in other parts of the hospital if we can. You can visit as much as you like down there and she'll get good nursing care. And it won't mean that she'll get any less care than she will here.
Special renal nurses have been sent downstairs to the isolation unit to set up the dialysis machine. She'll be carefully monitored by the renal team. Her condition is critical.
Can you tell me where you are? Do you know what this place is? What is it?
Outside, the Nichols family anxiously awaits news. To protect other patients, everything that's been in contact with Mrs. Nichols is scrubbed with disinfectant. Even the unused resuscitator is wrapped and sent away for sterilization. In the meantime, the microbiology team arrives in intensive care. A nurse who spots them coming quickly washes her hands.
Dig your nails in and see what's in the nails. Okay. So it might be easy this way.
The swabbing and sample collecting goes on uneventfully until Val Humphrey spots an orderly handling respiratory equipment. Many of the infected cases were respiratory, and she notices he has dermatitis. He could be shedding 10 times as much skin as a normal person, and perhaps 10 times as much bacteria.
That just broke out again around about 3 weeks. I usually keep it covered, but when you said that you were taking swabs, I didn't bother about covering it.
Is it sore? Let's see it in a couple of days. Have you got any further problems? You got it anywhere else on it?
The test showed he was positive, so he was sent home until his sore healed. 5 days later in the isolation unit, Mrs. Nichols is much better, thanks to the regular dialysis she has been receiving. A couple of weeks later, she went home after a complete recovery. Her progress had not been hindered by her stay in isolation. Downstairs, the staff of the intensive care unit gathered to hear the results of the survey.
We found 5 people in the area had positive MRSA cultures for their fingers and their fingernails. And they were from the impression plates we did. Apart from that, we found also that 2 people had MRSA on the fronts of their pennies. So it probably wasn't terribly significant, but I think it does show that MRSA does get onto your clothing, and MRSA and any staph will pass through the cotton on your gowns or your uniforms, and you've got to change them fairly regularly.
The report on this outbreak confirms that some of the staff members were carrying MRSA on their hands.
And most of you did go and wash your hands when you knew you were going to be cultured. that didn't bother us from the point of view of the survey because, I mean, if you wash your hands and then we culture you and find you're negative, that's good. It's terrific. But if you've washed your hands and we find that you're positive in just, you know, the points that you've missed in your fingers, then perhaps that's saying something else, isn't it?
Val Humphrey wants them to realize that the object of the exercise is not to victimize anybody, but to keep everyone on their toes.
Says that she has to be moved tonight.
The past few years have not been easy for Val Humphrey. She sometimes felt as unpopular as the germ she's trying to eradicate.
I don't think I will ever reconcile to the fact that I am part policeman in the eyes of many of the staff. I still get the impression when I walk into a ward that people see me coming and I'm troubled, that I'm going to tell them they've got an infection.
Nevertheless, all the education and vigilance of the past have paid off. Today, most surgeons and doctors have been persuaded to go along with the Royal Melbourne's isolation policy. Staphylococcus is endemic in many large hospitals throughout the world. The Australian experience is only unique because it got so out of control that thousands of patients were put at risk, and many may have died as a result.
With the virtue of hindsight, more aggressive action early on might have curtailed a lot of our problems. And that, I think, is the message for other institutions, to look at the problems that we've got into and to see whether they couldn't circumvent them and curtail them by more energetic measures taken early on.
What happened in Australia, I think, is an extreme example of what can happen in parts of the world where one is not expecting that kind of problem and are caught more or less with their pants down. That is, an infection, resistant infection arrives, and one is really not expecting it to go any further and is not prepared to begin tracking it. I'm happy to say that that has not occurred elsewhere in the world, but we're more aware of it because of Australia's experience and how they've managed to handle it. But even today, in other parts of the world, in the United States, the incidence of MRSA is rising in hospitals, in this case, teaching hospitals, going from about 6.5% 4 years ago to about 12% now.
In the United States, there has been no single infection outbreak as serious as the Australian epidemic. But since the late 60s, antibiotic resistance has been on the rise. The first methicillin-resistant infection outbreak was at Boston City Hospital in 1967. In the 70s, published studies cite similar incidents at the University of Virginia Hospital in Charlottesville, Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, and at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. These are only a few examples. The National Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta monitors infection outbreaks through a voluntary hospital surveillance program. A recent report estimates that approximately 2 million patients are infected each year. It is difficult to be more precise about either the extent of the problem or the institutions responsible because hospitals are not required to report outbreaks. It may seem paradoxical that the worst resistance problems occur in some of the best teaching and community hospitals, but these hospitals care for the gravely ill patients who are the most vulnerable to infection. Fortunately, since the 70s, most of these hospitals have set up permanent infection control programs. Antibiotic resistance is not a problem unique to Staphylococcus. Many other organisms, such as Streptococcus, gonorrhea, and typhoid, are displaying disturbing patterns of multi-resistance. Neither is antibiotic resistance confined to hospitals. Overzealous prescribing of antibiotics for minor ailments has made its own contribution to the pool of resistant bacteria. If this pattern of antibiotics abuse continues, what is hanging in the balance is not only the control of infectious disease, but the incredible advance of medical science itself. Today, most organ transplants, surgery, and cancer therapy are dependent on antibiotics. If these drugs are rendered useless, the risk of patients acquiring resistant infection will increase and make these modern medical procedures dangerous.
I think most of us believe in human ingenuity and thinking that we will, by one means or the other, succeed in maintaining our control over bacteria. But it's going to cost us something, either in using the drugs better or in finding new means of using our old drugs or new drugs.
Recently, drug companies have been working on new chemicals that block the enzymes which cause resistance. The race between bacteria and biochemists continues.
ever taken penicillin before?
Yes.
Okay, you've never had any reactions to it.
I think if one looks back on the history of the interaction between organisms and antibiotics over the last 40 years, it's a dynamic interaction. At times the organisms do well, at times the chemists make breakthroughs and get very far ahead. But I think this is a concept to have, that it is a dynamic balance with man's ingenuity versus microbial evolution. I've got confidence in the chemists, but I think it's terribly important that doctors and patients understand that microbial evolution is very powerful, and that if we're to give our chemists time to catch up and to get ahead and to keep in front, that we should be as discriminating in the use of what's a very valuable natural resource as we can be.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. To purchase film or video copies of this program for educational use, call toll-free 1-800-621-2131. In Illinois or Alaska, call Collect, 312-940-1260. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying health care products worldwide.